2, 3, 4.
So in the last episode we got the bridge and the tailpiece fitted, and I'm kind of really happy with the way that they've gone together. And save for a few little jobs, we're kind of ready for the paint prep on the body. I've also done a little bit of work off camera on the headstock. You might remember the last time I said that the little washers that came with the tuners didn't look at anything like the washers that were on Johnny's guitar. I've actually bought a little bag of stainless steel 18mm washers, which I've positioned on there, and they look absolutely spot on as far as I'm concerned in terms of matching what was on the original guitar. And I think this kind of unpolished stainless look kind of is very reminiscent of what was on his guitar anyway. I might do a little bit more work on those just to kind of make them a little bit rougher, but I think for the time being they'll be absolutely fine. The headstock is still way too thick, so the tuners aren't sticking through as they should do, and adding that kind of slightly thicker washer has made that worse, but we can make sure that everything works fine once we get to that stage of the game. So with that done, I can put the neck to one side for the time being, and we can start to focus in on getting this body sorted. And I said there's one or two little jobs to do, and there are some kind of very small ones. We need to put the strap buttons on, shouldn't take too long. We need to dress these ends where the neck pocket meets the body a lot better, just to make them look nice. I need to find a nice reference image so we can do that, and then we can start with the sanding and everything else we need to do to get it ready for paint. However, in the last episode I mentioned some of the inconsistencies that are coming to light as we move through this project, and there are a few on here which I actually want to look at. Firstly is the distance between the pickup and the bridge. Now this is done to the drawing and it's absolutely spot on. However, when you look at the reference image of Johnny's guitar, this distance is much smaller. Working from the image, it looks to be about the width of the pickup, maybe a little bit more. And if I get a rule on the job, we can see that that is about 28mm on mine, and the pickup's about 18 wide, 17 or 18mm. So there's probably about 10mm too much material between the bridge and where the pickup is located. Now that is a problem because I can't just move this back in the pick guard 10mm because it will leave an ugly great big hole. However, that leads me on to my next little issue, and that is the pick guard itself, because on the drawing it says that the pick guard is just 1-ply black material. And that would be correct for the original pick guard. Of course, this isn't the original. This is a completely different pick guard made to kind of house these two pickups. And in reality, the pick guard on Johnny's guitar is 3-ply. Had I known that, it would have made my life a lot easier, because 3-ply pick guard material is a lot easier to get hold of than 1-ply. But there you go. And again, this is one of those situations where I actually spent a long time looking at the photographs of the pick guard and completely missed the fact that it's 3-ply. But in my defence, on the main one I was looking at where it's heads on, it kind of looks like there's a bit of a highlight around the edge, but in reality that was the white layer of the guard. So having looked at another image, it is actually quite clear that it is 3-ply. So this is going to have to go. I'm not seeing it as a problem, I'm seeing it as an opportunity, because it will solve the issue of having the wrong material on, and also it will give me the opportunity to move this pickup back a little bit in the pick guard. To that end, I've actually done a little bit of work under here, and I've just extended that cutout a few millimeters so I can move the pickup back the amount that I need. And I've done a little bit of testing and jiggling about, and I have ascertained that I can actually move the pickup back far enough now that we've altered that route. I'm not particularly concerned about how that looks We have got absolutely no idea what the original looks like under the pick guard, so I'm happy to go with that slightly different route. The original pickups in here were kind of sort of P90 mini humbucker size, so they wouldn't have had this route in the first place. So I would imagine underneath the pick guard is going to look a bit of a mess. So with that all explained, we can now start to do some of the jobs on the body. I'll probably make the pick guard off camera because you've already seen me make one of those. You don't need to see it again. So I think the first thing I'll do on this one is get the easy job out of the way, and I'm going to attach the strap buttons. Now, I'm not entirely sure what Johnny used on his guitar because both of them are covered up with a load of duct tape, but it does actually looking at it, like there might be a strap lock under there. So I'm going to go with these. I always tend to use strap locks because I just kind of like that sense of security. Don't need those bits for now, and we'll just get everything else off the body and out of the way, and we'll set about getting those in position. And the first thing we need to do to fit these strap buttons is find out how thick the body is so we can find the centre. Now, I've had people in the comments say that the body looks a little bit thick. Now, it should be 1 3/4 inches, and I'm getting 1,786, so it's about kind of 20 to 30 thou thicker than it should be at the moment because I've left some material on for sanding. So to answer that query, no, it isn't too thick. It is pretty much spot on, just with a little spare meat for when we sand. So in metric, that is 45 mil, should be 44 and a bit. So about 1/2 mil, maybe a little bit more over where it needs to be. So if we set my marking gauge to about 22.5 mil, and then we can just mark that onto the centre line of the heel. I'll go from both sides, see if there's any discrepancy, but that looks absolutely spot on. And I'm thinking on this horn, we'll go about there. Again, mark that in, and then we can just finalise that with the awl for both those positions. Now, screws are about 4 mil, so I'm going to go with a 3 mil drill bit to drill those holes. Plenty of wax onto them threads. And then just do exactly the same on the other one. Now, if you're wondering about the wax, it is literally just to give this a little bit of lubrication as it goes in. Sometimes the screws for hardware can be a little bit on the dodgy side, and the last thing you want is to be snapping them in your body. These seem to have gone in absolutely fine, so no problem there. And next up, what I want to do is just to kind of do this rounding over work here. And there's 2 reasons I want to do that. Obviously, this looks a little bit scruffy, but also this kind of very thin section of wood there would be very delicate and would probably just end up getting damaged. So I want to take some of that away and make it a little bit thicker and a little bit more resilient. And to make this look authentic, I'm going to pull up some reference photographs and see if I can see exactly how the original looked. And looking at this drawing, you can see there's not actually a huge amount of shape into these little sections. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to take my little template that I produced for this. Now, I think on the top of here, we're not bad. I think we're quite close to where we need to be. So I'm going to mark that on the template. And I'm just going to square that across to the other side of the template. Doesn't have to be absolutely dead accurate here. And that will give me an idea of where I need to kind of trim that one back to. Realistically speaking, this is just an outcome from the routing process. Just at one point it's kind of feathered this edge a little bit more than it has on this one. And I think the best thing I can do here is just very gently saw this down. Give that a bit of a tidy up. And I actually think just a few kind of strokes with a file will kind of give us the round over that we need. And just blend it all in with a bit of sandpaper. I think that looks pretty good. And with that done, we can move on to another couple of little jobs in this area. Firstly, I've left this section deliberately a little bit long, just until I had a better idea of what was going on with it. So we can get this trimmed down a little bit now. So I need to break out the relevant drawing because that has got a dimension on there, which is 97.76 millimeters. So we're kind of getting on towards 98, which will leave just a little bit of spare for sanding, etc. And I think my little template is pretty much spot on with that, so I'm just going to use the template to mark it. And there's a little bit of spare material there as well that just needs cleaning up. So you can bang this over to the bandsaw, just get that off. A little bit of cleaning up work, a little bit of profiling of that corner, and we move on to the next bit. And there I've just blended those corners in by hand. No point getting the router out just for those little bits. So that's all looking good now. So we can get this back on the bench. And we can do the next little bit on this neck pocket, which is to get the holes drilled in for the neck screws or bolts. And simply a case of, I've got some holes in my little template. Just fire a transfer punch through those, and these are measuring in at 4.88 mil, so I think if we go 5.5 mil with the holes, that should give us plenty. However, I don't really want to be drilling through with that size drill bit just yet, because we need to put these ferrules in the back before we drill the bigger holes, otherwise I'll lose my centres. So I'm going to drill through here with probably 2.5, 3 mil drill bit. So over to the drill press, 2.5 mil through all of those to mark the back, drill out for the ferrules, and then from there we can drill the 5.5 mil holes for the actual bolts to go through. and there's those 4 little ferrules fitted in place. What I'm probably going to do with these is I'll give them a bit of a sand down, I'll etch prime them, and then I'll glue them in place in the body so they're not going to move, and then I'll paint the body with them in so they'll be less apparent and a little bit more like the original. Okay, so that's that element done. There's another little job that I can think of that needs doing on the front, and that is to put in the ground wire from the bridge post. And I can actually see this being quite awkward because it's a fairly chunky kind of a distance between the post and the control cavity. So I think my best bet is to go in through the pickup cavity and try and do it that way. That might be potentially a little bit problematic because obviously we need this pickup to go all the way back here. But if you're familiar with a Stratocaster style pickup, there's a bit at the bottom which is the kind of the thickest bit, so that will leave us a little bit of room a little bit higher up. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I've got a kind of a long series drill bit here, and I think if I kind of go in along that route there, I'm going to start as high as I can. I'm going to try and keep away from the front edge of the pickup route if at all possible, and just drill through into there. And this is just one of those big boys trouser moments, I think. And happily that has gone through in the right place. I'll see if I can get a close-up of that in a second. And I don't know if you'll be able to see that if the hole is too small, but there is definitely a wire running through there now, which is absolutely brilliant. Now, there has been a little bit of discussion about what I'm going to actually do with this ground wire once everything is kind of assembled, because it will be the only thing that is attached to the body once I take the pick guard off. Now, what I intend to do, and I think this is probably the best thing, is I'm going to add an additional ground wire onto the tone pot. I'll have my wire coming through from the bridge post, and on each of them I'm just going to put one of these little crimp-on eyelets, and then I can screw them both down onto the conductive foil that will be lining the control cavity, and then we'll have a continuity on the ground circuit. Then when it's time to take off the pick guard to do whatever I need to do, I'll just simply have to undo that little screw and the 2 wires will become disconnected and we can pull it all off. So with that done, I am pretty much at the stage now where I can start the paint prep on this. Now, in terms of the paint, obviously this is going to be heavily relicked and I'm not going to make any attempt whatsoever to polish it up. In all of the pictures, the paint looks incredibly flat. But there's one thing that I have noticed about the paint which makes me wonder about it a little bit. In all of the pictures, right from the very early days of Johnny having this guitar up to the photographs of when it was sold at auction, which are probably the latest that I've seen, it is white. When I say white, I mean it is proper white. It's not yellowed at all over that time period. Now, if it was a nitro paint, I would suggest that over the 20 odd years that it was in use, it would have yellowed to some extent. And that's why you see a lot of vintage white guitars just don't look white anymore. So I don't think it was a nitro finish. However, I am going to put some nitro paint on it, but I've chosen Arctic White. This is from Northwest Guitars. It is the whitest white paint I could find in this format, and I think it will give us the finish that we're looking for. I'm going to have to be quite careful and spray on quite thin for a couple of reasons. Firstly, if I'm going to be relicking this, I don't want to be like kind of scraping off huge amounts of paint. It'd be much easier to do if the paint finish was quite thin. And also, I don't want to build up a super glossy finish because I'm just going to have to matte it off anyway, because the paint finish on the guitar that we're trying to replicate was in no way shiny. However, all of that is for a future episode. What I've got to do now is get the sander on this and start to kind of take it down to an acceptable finish. I'm not going to go super fine on it because at the end of the day it is going to get relicked, but we do need better than what we've got now. However, I really honestly believe there can be nothing more boring to watch than somebody else sanding something for hours on end. So I'm going to do all of that kind of off camera, and I'll catch up with you in the next episode where hopefully we'll get this into paint. As always, don't forget to hit the like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.